Night folds over Jacksonville Beach like a sheet drawn across a quiet room. The air is mild, salt still clinging to the wind from the Atlantic. Streetlights hum. The Volkswagen Atlas slows between Jacksonville Drive and Sanctuary Boulevard, a small road lined with palms that hardly move. Something lies in the lane ahead, a tire, black, unmarked, perfectly placed. Inside the car, a 2-year-old girl watches her father step out. His door opens, the dome light flickers across the concrete, then closes again behind him. The world shrinks to the sound of his shoes, a soft scuff, once, twice, before the echo breaks. 7 shots. The night doesn't scream, it just stops breathing. Minutes later, headlights curve around the corner. Someone brakes hard. A phone call begins with panic and ends with silence. When officers arrive, they find the man lying beside the open door, his keys still in hand. Bullets have passed through the car's frame, glass scattered across the child's seat. She is alive. The father, Jared Bridegan, 33, is not. No sign of robbery, no footprints that lead away. Only the tire, still there, still perfect, and the quiet knowledge that someone placed it exactly where he would stop.
The scene holds its shape like a room that hasn't been touched since morning. Jacksonville Drive meets Sanctuary Boulevard at a quiet angle, houses set back behind low hedges, porch lights spaced like patient markers. Asphalt carries a faint salt film from earlier air, a dull grey under the street lamps. Palms lean without interest. The hour sits between errands and sleep. Cars pass rarely, soft tire noise, a wash and a fade. The Volkswagen Atlas approaches from St. Augustine's side, white paint taking on the amber of sodium light. Inside, a car seat behind the driver, straps buckled, a small blanket patterned with animals, a lidded cup wedged where a child can reach it. On the passenger floor, a reusable bag with papers, a slim laptop sleeve, a child's jacket folded without care. The dashboard clock glows in its own logic. Air vents whisper. The front seats carry that mixed scent of lotion, plastic, and day-old coffee. A shape interrupts the headlight beam. The tire appears first as a circle of shadow and then as matter, positioned squarely in the lane, offset just enough to force a stop. Not tilted, not scuffed. The tread faces the headlights. The sidewall shows no mark of a blowout, no torn edge, no heat bloom from travel. A tire placed, not lost. The distance from the curb gives away intent. Too central for a wind push, too neat for gravity. Brakes compress, the Atlas nose settles, the cabin light does not engage. The car idles with an even hum. A quiet decision forms in the driver's throat. Move the thing and be home. He checks mirrors out of habit. No car behind, no motion in the side glass. A porch light far back. A porch camera that misses this angle. The road holds its breath. Door latch clicks, night air slides into the cabin, cool for Florida, carrying sea and lawn. A shoe finds the street, sole cupping small grains of sand that traveled inland on tires. Weight shifts out of the seat. The dome light lifts for a moment and sets itself down. A child murmurs in sleep language and resettles. He stands in the beam of his own headlights. Eyes adjust. The tire sits 6 or 7 steps forward, dead center, a simple object. He walks with a practical rhythm, a measured pace from door to obstacle. On his left, the curb. On his right, the dark mouth of a side street. Overhead, a wire hums quietly between poles. No dogs bark, no gate clicks. The city's background lights draw a low ceiling. Hands reach. Rubber is cool, dusted. Fingers take the sidewall, find grip. The object yields. The weight is real but manageable, a drag more than a lift. The shoulder tenses to brace. The body tilts a few degrees for leverage.
head turned slightly, ribs expanding against the effort. Shoe soles adjust on grit. The tire edges away from the lane, angling toward the curb that would make it harmless. Sound changes before the body understands. Not a car, not a door, not a step. A pressure shift, like air made thinner by a decision behind it. The headlights throw the tire's shadow long across asphalt, and that shadow shivers as something enters the beam from a side angle that never meant to be honest. The first shot cuts through the panel-thin fabric between movement and stillness. Muzzle report folds into stucco walls and soft grass. A flash blooms and dies in less than a blink, a white seed falling in the dark. The bullet strikes with a noise unlike anything else that lives on a street, a hard, flat punctuation. The Volkswagen's hood takes a speck of metal, the windshield catches fragments. A second shot follows with surgical spacing, not panic, not delay, more like a metronome that knows the time. The body turns by instinct, not plan. One foot skids on the thin dusting of sand, rubber finds no purchase for half a heartbeat. Keys hang loose in one hand. The tire kilts back into the lane, as if to reclaim the place it was assigned. The child's seat remains a small island in the rear, straps empty of struggle, a soft rhythm of breath unaware of geometry and angles. A jacket on the passenger floor shifts half an inch under the pulse of air. More shots arrive, each one pulls a line from a different corner, as if mapping a set of coordinates around a single point. Glass carries cracks that bloom like spiderwebs, a small halo around the place where material met speed. One round threads through open space by pure tolerance, punching through air inches from the car seat's edge, exiting with the same indifference it entered. The path is clean, the implication is not. Silence grows edges. The smell of discharge settles, sharp, metal sweet, like a coin pressed into a tongue. A small fog of dust spins in headlight cones and loses interest. Somewhere in the near distance, an HVAC unit kicks on and hums against stucco, a domestic machine continuing its script. Whoever fired does not occupy the center of the road. The angle tells a different placement, a position just outside the direct reach of light, where the shooter owns both the scene and an exit. Footfalls recede across a surface with gives, not gravel, not full grass, perhaps a narrow strip of landscaped mulch bordering an HOA fence, perhaps the shallow incline behind a hedge that hides the outline of a person reducing to shadow. No sprint, no shout, no car door slam. A removal, careful and pre-written. The Volkswagen remains alive for a few seconds more, idling, the fan whispering, the seatbelt chime unbothered, the radio quietly lit but saying nothing. The driver's door sits open enough to suggest return. The dome light tests a glow and holds it. A spray of glass beads the seat leather like rain that never melts. A neighbor's window holds a rectangle of blue from a television show that does not hear. Another porch carries an empty chair with a cushion that remembers a body. A sprinkler head rises late in a yard 2 doors down and spits a thin arc onto a walkway that doesn't need it. The clock inside a kitchen, if checked, would show a number that will become important later. Headlights from an approaching car write long shadows of mailbox posts across the scene. Brakes bring wake forward. A phone appears in trembling hands. Street addresses become coordinates. Words enter the night that make it official. A person down, shots heard. A child inside a car, please hurry. Sound takes on a purpose it didn't have 10 minutes ago. Officers arrive with a choreography that looks improvised but isn't. One secures the approach, hand extended in a shape that signals slow. Another moves to the open door, eyes scanning the cabin, voice low to suit a child. A third takes the perimeter, light swinging softly across ground cover, fence breaks, pulled shadow. Radios give and receive. Timestamps accumulate. The routine expands to fit the unexpected. The street accepts cones and tape as if it always meant to hold them. Gloves slide into place with a dry snap. A flashlight lens moves close to the tire that sits again in the lane, just slightly off where it began. The rubber shows no crush marks from a vehicle crossing, no dirt smear along the edge that would suggest a toss. Hands do not lift it. Hands only circle it with light and attention, measuring its relationship to skid marks that do not exist and footprints that will not hold shape on this mix of sand and asphalt. A camera clicks in a patient arc. Wide scene, mid-scene, close detail. Numbers on small placards begin to denote the case's alphabet. Shell casings live where the shooter expected them to live, not scattered, not chaotic. Each brass piece catches light and gives it back in a whisper. Trajectories are not guessed, they are traced with string and angle finders, line by line, from entry to exit, through metal and glass, into air, into nothing. The pattern repeats with a confidence that suggests rehearsal. The Atlas's engine goes quiet. The key is located and secured. A soft blanket from the back seat becomes both evidence and comfort for tiny shoulders. A small voice asks a question that no adult answers directly. An officer's tone becomes lower, smoother, as if rough surfaces can be filed by sound alone. The child leaves the vehicle wrapped, carried, eyes looking backward without knowing why. Neighbors gather at distances that feel safe. Arms fold against chests, phones glow discreetly. Faces float in the half-light with the tentative curiosity of people who will call this a safe street tomorrow. A garage door opens and holds, unfinished. Its sensor stares at the ground, as if it too has something to record. Rain does not fall. Wind does not interfere. Evidence obeys gravity and stays where it should. A single ant navigates the curb line because that is what it began before the shots and intends to finish. Somewhere far off, a train leans on its horn and pulls sound through the night like a thread through cloth. The body lies within a geometry that says interruption rather than struggle. Hands do not claw at the street. Palms lie as hands lie, when the brain speaks its last clear instruction and nothing follows to revise it. Clothing holds the day's creases. A phone remains in a pocket, screen dark until a call buzzes and goes unanswered. The watch on the wrist is exact until it isn't. A detective kneels to the level of the road and watches headlight glare move across brass, across glass, across the faint misting on painted metal that used to answer to a name. Measurements accumulate, curb to tire, tire to door, door to body, casing to casing, casing to imagined origin. The distances fit into a pattern that leaves little room for accident. Even the pause between shots finds a place on a timeline that will later be reanimated in a courtroom with diagrams and calibrated lasers. For the moment, numbers feel like a kind of mercy. Paramedics arrive and bring the formal language of attempt. Hands attend to what they must, and the scene makes a space for that ritual before reclaiming its quiet. Sheets and straps, a voice calling out observations for a record that will follow the case longer than any single person on this street. The child does not watch this part. The child has been carried to a cruiser where a stuffed animal with stitched eyes keeps watch, where an officer with a measured voice speaks about lights and stickers and the simple power of a flashlight that can make a ceiling into stars. The tire finds itself lifted at last by gloves that leave no oil, placed beside a marker, photographed again from a slightly different angle. Its origin does not volunteer itself. Its tread pattern is noted, its brand logged, its serial read with patience. The curb accepts its temporary absence without remark. The lane looks briefly like a lane again. Around the scene, lawn edges hold tiny troughs where a person could place a foot without leaving a print worth arguing about. A side path opens between 2 yards toward a retention pond, a black mirror that swallows streetlight without taste. A wooden fence runs along the pond's edge, a segment missing near a utility box. Freshness cannot be read in the dark. The absence still matters. A blue Ford F-150 exists somewhere in the web of this night, either present and unseen, or present in memory only. Cameras on porches with narrow fields of view hold silence on their SD cards. A traffic camera farther away happens to point a degree off usefulness. A security sign in one yard advertises an awareness that did not include this corner. The street resumes its posture as a place where nothing happens. Tape holds a bright line under the lamps. Officers' voices remain low. Assignment, like heartbeat. Perimeter, casings, trajectory. Canvas, witnesses, child welfare, tow. A detective stands where the headlights met the tire and looks at the invisible person who planned for another person to stop right here. The planning is the loudest sound left. By midnight, the air has cooled 2 degrees. The palm fronds make a sound that could be mistaken for a whisper, if one believed in that sort of thing. The Atlas leaves on a flat bed, its rearview mirror flashing brief constellations up the eaves of quiet houses. The street exposes the shape of absence, a bright rectangle where a car idled, a darker patch where people stood still, a scuff that will be gone under the first morning sprinkler cycle. Somewhere in the neighborhood, a dog finally barks at nothing specific. A porch light clicks off. A baby monitor hums. The pond stays black. The corner remains exactly itself, and also not itself anymore. The reconstruction ends where it began, at the place in the lane where a tire sat as if it had always belonged there. It didn't. It came from a plan, moved by hands that did not shake, placed at a distance calculated for a man who would stop, step out, and do the ordinary thing that decent people do in the dim hours on quiet roads. The road keeps that knowledge as roads do, without commentary, without grief, holding the geometry of what happened, waiting for a language that measures instead of mourns. By dawn, the road looks ordinary again. The tire has been lifted, the body moved, the sand swept enough to let morning joggers pass without slowing. But the air still holds residue, a quiet imbalance that resists daylight. Detectives begin with what is measurable. Tire placement, deliberate. Shooting angle, left flank 4 meters off center. No casings on the main lane, all found in a tight scatter on the shoulder. That consistency suggests control, not chaos. The shooter knew what time to strike and where to stand. The first 911 call came at 7:47 p.m. The first police cruiser arrived 3 minutes later. Those 3 minutes form the space in which the killer vanished. The surrounding houses, white stucco, flat lawns, faint ocean hum, offer security cameras that capture everything except what mattered. One motion sensor triggers at 7:43, another at 7:50. Between them, nothing moves. A detective leans over a monitor in the mobile unit, replaying fragments. A blur of headlights, a glint of metal. Another camera facing east records what appears to be a pickup truck, older, dark-colored, tailgate dented. The make becomes a question answered by habit. A Ford F-150, model years somewhere between 2000 and 2004. Too many of those exist in Florida to mean much on its own. Still, it is a start. At headquarters, they mapped the route. Jared Bridegan left his ex-wife's home minutes before the shooting. He had followed the same drive dozens of times, same streets, same timing, always around dusk. Someone knew that rhythm intimately. The investigators list who might: family, friends, neighbors, colleagues, anyone who knew the custody schedule. They underline one name twice. The ex-wife lives north, a calm community in Washington now, out of reach but not out of relevance. Their separation was years past, but the custody battles had continued. Phone records, financial disputes, shared holidays passed by court orders. The detective's notes use words like resentment, litigation, custody modification. Those words are often precursors to violence, though rarely to precision. A forensic analyst catalogues the ballistic pattern: .45 caliber rounds, fired from a semi-automatic pistol, spacing consistent with a shooter trained in steady breathing. One casing carries a partial fingerprint, too smudged for identification. The brass bears unique firing pin impressions, which the lab enters into the national database. Weeks later, that search will echo back a faint connection, an unregistered firearm recovered years earlier in an unrelated case. But for now, the connection is noise, not proof. The autopsy begins at sunrise. The medical examiner notes entry points, trajectory, and powder residue. Close range, deliberate grouping, upper torso. Death would have been near instantaneous. The report avoids speculation, but between its lines sits the unspoken certainty. The killer didn't aim to frighten or wound, they aimed to end. Phone records, traffic data, bank transactions, these form the invisible perimeter of every modern crime. Detectives obtain a warrant for cellular tower pings near Sanctuary Boulevard between 7 and 8 p.m. Dozens of signals appear. Most belong to commuters or residents. One belongs to a man named Henry Tenen, age 61, living in a modest duplex south of the city. The name rings faintly from past records, minor offenses, nothing that predicts this scale. But his phone's presence at the exact coordinates of the murder is not coincidence. They visit him 2 days later. He answers slow, calm, weathered. His house smells of cigarettes and metal. On a counter, a Ford key fob rests beside a chipped mug. He nods when asked if he owns the truck. Blue, older model, still running. They ask if he was near Jacksonville Beach that night. He says no. They ask to look at the truck. He hesitates, then agrees. Mud lines the wheel wells. The tailgate dent matches the video's reflection. Inside the glove compartment, a single spent casing. He claims he doesn't know where it came from. The search of his bank account tells a different story. 3 checks, deposited weeks after the murder, 2 for small amounts, 1 for $5,000. All signed by a name investigators recognize, Mario Fernandez-Saldana, husband of Jared's ex-wife, Shanna Gardner. The handwriting is neat, the memo lines blank. When confronted with this, Henry Tenen asks for a lawyer. He is taken into custody on unrelated firearms charges, a procedural move that buys time. Behind closed doors, detectives lay out the pattern: his truck, his phone, the checks. He looks at each photo as if seeing his own handwriting for the first time. Hours pass. Eventually, he folds his hands, sighs, and speaks the words investigators expect but still find chilling. I wasn't the one who wanted him dead, I was the one who made it happen.
A confession forms not in one piece, but in fragments, each given like offerings. Tenen says he was asked to take care of a problem. He doesn't say who used that phrase, but he mentions phone calls, many of them short and cautious. 35 in February, 30 more in March, all between him and Mario. They discussed payment, timing, the route Jared always took, the nights he drove alone with a youngest child. The tire was an idea rehearsed once, Tenen claims, to see if it worked. It did. Investigators retrace that rehearsal. Weeks before the murder, a resident reported a similar obstruction on the same stretch of road, a tire in the lane, removed before any harm. The detail had seemed random then. Now it glows with intent. It shows the patience of design. In March 2023, Mario Fernandez-Saldana is arrested at his home in Orange County. The knock at the door is quiet, his reaction quieter. He is read the charges: first-degree murder, conspiracy, solicitation to commit a capital felony, and child abuse for endangering the daughter who sat feet from death. He says nothing except that he wants to call his lawyer. The story moves through its next inevitable phase: subpoenas, interviews, media attention. The ex-wife, Shanna Gardner Fernandez, remains in Washington until August, when an indictment arrives for her as well. Prosecutors frame the motive not as rage, but control. Control over custody, narrative, life's last variable.
The court documents mention text messages, financial strain, fragments of resentment built over years of small wounds. Through every new revelation, one constant remains: the tire. That ordinary, stupid object becomes the symbol of premeditation. Detectives revisit it in lab rooms and testimonies. Its tread pattern matches tires from the suspect's property, though not conclusively. Even if it cannot speak, it tells the story better than anyone else could. The simplicity of manipulation. How death can be engineered out of routine. Henry Tannen accepts a plea deal. Second-degree murder, 15 years, and testimony in exchange for leniency. His voice on the stand will later describe the street, the night, the way the air smelled before the shots. He will say he felt nothing, only a job, only instructions followed. People will wonder if that's true. For investigators, closure is procedural. Evidence sealed, timelines matched, reports submitted. But every officer who walked that road still remembers the quiet after the sound, the motionless child, the strange perfection of the setup. The kind of detail that keeps replaying how an ordinary evening turned mechanical. The trial looms ahead, still delayed by paperwork and motions. Prosecutors prepare for a death penalty pursuit, knowing the defense will paint their clients as manipulated or misunderstood. It doesn't matter yet. What matters is the pattern. Every line, every call, every check, traced until the shape of conspiracy holds its own dark symmetry. When they leave the station late at night, detectives drive that same route home. Many slow instinctively when they see debris on the road, branches, bags, shadows. They look twice before stepping out. They always will. The deeper the case unfolds, it begins to resemble a family photograph turned inside out. Faces still smile, but the eyes have gone hollow. What looked like love becomes leverage. What sounded like disagreement becomes motive. Investigators start reading the story backward, tracing emotion through evidence. The marriage between Jared and Shanna had ended years before the shots, but endings rarely end cleanly. There were the usual arrangements: alternating weekends, holidays split like property, court filings that measured affection in hours and signatures. Yet within those quiet administrative lines, resentment had grown roots. Shanna Gardner lived a life of precision, curated, scheduled, social. To outsiders, she was controlled and articulate, running a small bakery, maintaining a polished image. But friends would later say her calm had edges, the kind that cut when life didn't obey her. She'd spoken of Jared in the tone one uses for unfinished business. The custody battles had bled into identity. She believed she was the better parent. He believed stability mattered more than comfort. Both were right in parts, and wrong in the ways that count. Mario Fernandez entered her orbit not as a rescuer but as reinforcement. He owned a small business, a gym, carried himself with the confidence of someone used to giving instructions and being obeyed. Together they built a narrative that justified the growing hostility. Jared was the obstacle. The case files use words like manipulation and control dynamics. Psychologists later note the pattern: resentment layered with financial pressure, a shared sense of grievance feeding on repetition. In the months before the murder, Shanna's messages to friends carried subtle notes of exhaustion and entitlement. "He won't stop," one read. "He's always in the way." Another, sent late one night, simply said, "I want peace." But peace, for some, arrives only when the opposing voice is gone. That's the psychology of finality, the point where one stops negotiating with the living and starts planning for silence. Mario's phone reveals searches about custody murder cases and tracking devices. He had a methodical curiosity, the kind that confuses research with control. Tenon, the man who would pull the trigger, was his employee, a handyman who fixed things and followed directions. That obedience, ordinary in context, became lethal when applied to instruction without morality. The first offer of payment was small, an envelope passed through vague language. "Help me handle something," Mario had said. Tenon later claimed he didn't know at first that it meant murder. But the tire didn't move itself, and the gun didn't rise from the ground. Somewhere between suggestion and act, he crossed the threshold of choice. Psychologists who later studied the case described its dynamic as distributed guilt, each participant telling themselves a smaller version of the story. "I only wanted him frightened. I only drove him there. I only pulled the trigger because I was told to." The diffusion makes everyone believe they're less than fully responsible. And that's how violence becomes collective without conscience. For Shanna, control was emotional currency. Her messages after the crime do not sound like grief. They sound like performance. She hosted gatherings, posted photos, smiled as though the world had simply corrected itself. The investigation would later note her language. No past tense, no hesitation, no mention of Jared's name. Absence disguised as stability. Behind closed doors, though, fragments leaked. Neighbors overheard her frustration about the media circus. A friend recalled her saying she just wanted to move on. The phrase in psychological terms marks the rationalization stage, the human mind's desperate attempt to normalize the unthinkable. To survive one's own orchestration, the brain must edit reality until guilt sounds like noise from another room. Meanwhile, Mario's dissent was less polished. He spoke to Tenon more than 70 times in the weeks after the killing, not to celebrate, not to reassure, but to control the narrative. Fear of exposure twisted his logic inward. He started avoiding his own gym, then stopped showing up at all. He'd drive aimlessly at night, convinced someone was watching, even when no one was. Conscience is never louder when it tries to whisper. Investigators reviewing the transcripts of those calls later noted his tone. Confident 1 minute, panicked the next. "We're fine," he'd say, then minutes later, delete everything. The language of denial has a rhythm, oscillation between invincibility and collapse. When the warrant arrived at his home, he had already rehearsed how to act surprised. The trial psychologists examining the case later described the crime as a slow-motion moral collapse. No single decision defined it. It was erosion by degree. Each justification carved away empathy until what remained was structure, a plan without humanity. The act itself took less than 10 seconds. The decay that led to it took years. For the investigators, understanding motive isn't about forgiveness, it's about pattern recognition, the forensic anatomy of emotion. They pieced together not just who pulled the trigger, but who decided it needed pulling. They look at credit card statements not for expense, but for psychology. Restaurant bills after arguments, purchases meant to impress, withdrawals timed with legal filings. Every receipt is a small confession. The community around them meanwhile oscillates between disbelief and ritual. Candlelight vigils, memorial walks, news segments titled "Justice for Jared." But time has no patience for purity. The story becomes content, the murder becomes a headline, then a hashtag, then background noise. The family endures the strange afterlife of public sympathy, letters from strangers, interviews, polite condolences repeated until they lose meaning. Through it all, the daughter, the child in the car, grows older, carrying memory shaped by adults who try to soften it. She will one day read that her father was killed a few feet away while she slept. The mind does not know where to place that kind of knowledge. It becomes a silent room one never enters. For Shanna, arrest came not as shock, but inevitability. Surveillance footage, bank trails, and Tenon's testimony closed the circle. When police approached her in Washington, she asked if she could finish something inside before leaving. That sentence stayed with the arresting officer, the domestic calm of someone treating custody like a mild inconvenience. He described her later as composed, polite, unbothered. The psychology of detachment perfected over years. Back in Florida, prosecutors dissected every decision. Why use a tire? Why that night? Why with the child present? Their theory was simple: precision born of obsession. Jared was predictable because decency often is. The plan worked because he stopped to help. The crime succeeded because kindness misjudged danger. That's the quiet terror of crimes like this. They feed on predictability. The more good someone is, the easier they are to trap. Jared didn't distrust. He didn't see patterns. He didn't prepare for malice in familiar places. It's why the investigators, even months later, speak of him with a kind of reverence, not just as a victim, but as proof of how fragile goodness becomes when others weaponize it. As the pre-trial hearings stretch on, defense attorneys speak of circumstantial inference, of undue public pressure. Their clients remain composed. They do not flinch when hearing the word murder. The courtroom air feels staged, as if reality were merely a story to be rearranged by tone and argument. At night, when court adjourns and the crowds thin, one detective sometimes drives the old route again, past the road where it happened, past the palms, the tire marks long gone. He says it's not to remember, but to measure silence, to confirm that evil doesn't always shout. Sometimes it just waits, perfectly still, in the middle of the road. The trial hadn't yet begun, but its gravity already hung over Florida like slow weather. Reporters waited outside courthouses, cameras pointed at doors that never revealed enough. What the public saw were fragments, the mugshots, the brief hearings, the polite phrases from attorneys. What the system saw was a case that refused to decay. Evidence occupied sealed boxes in climate-controlled rooms. The tire, wrapped in plastic, marked Exhibit A. A weapon retrieved months later, rusted and waterlogged, its serial numbers filed off. Phone logs, screenshots, financial statements, a web of data that replaced memory. In another box, a child's blanket, washed, but still carrying traces of glass dust that no wash could remove. Jared's family became the quiet center of orbiting noise. His wife Kirsten stood through every press conference, her tone steady, the strength of someone who had no other choice. She spoke softly of justice, never vengeance. Her composure made headlines because the world has forgotten what dignity sounds like. The twins from Jared's first marriage stayed with relatives, insulated from the echo chamber of coverage. They didn't watch the news, but they felt its temperature in the way adults whispered when entering rooms. The investigation turned into administration, forms, motions, discovery. The precision of law replaced the chaos of violence. Every word filed became architecture around absence. Florida's legal process stretched months into years. Delays formed their own ecosystem. Prosecutors pushed for the death penalty. Defense lawyers pushed for mercy. Between them sat the dead man's name, mentioned hundreds of times a week, and yet never heard again. Inside the detention center, Henry Tenon adjusted to silence. He was now both witness and criminal, occupying a moral no man's land. He ate meals without appetite, spoke little, read no papers. When detectives visited to confirm testimony, he never asked about the others. He didn't ask about Jared either. He only asked if the deal still stood. His cooperation, he believed, was redemption. But redemption, like guilt, has weight. It never leaves, it just settles. Mario Fernandez-Saldana spent his days in measured stillness. He declined interviews, kept to himself, and learned that time in custody has its own rhythm. Meals, inspections, artificial light. He wrote letters that were screened and stored, unsigned drafts that hinted at denial but never confessed. He claimed Tennant acted alone, that he'd been framed, that people wanted to destroy him because he had it all. In his mind, narrative still outweighed evidence. Shanna Gardner's reality unfolded differently. Her cell remained pristine, dead-aligned, books stacked symmetrically, a performance of control even within confinement. She wrote to her parents, to her children, but not to Mario. She maintained innocence through vocabulary, misunderstood, manipulated, framed. The words insulated her like walls. To the psychologists evaluating her, it became clear. She didn't break, she reorganized. When truth threatened structure, she simply rearranged the furniture of her beliefs. Outside the courthouse, Jacksonville Beach resumed its routines. Cars passed over the stretch of road where the tire had once rested, unaware of the map drawn beneath their wheels. Grass regrew along curbs that had been scraped clean. New homeowners moved into houses once circled by police tape. For them, it was just another quiet street with a memory no one mentioned after sunset. Every town that hosts a crime like this carries it differently. Some romanticize it, some deny it, some fold it into urban myth. Here, the silence was clinical. The neighbors avoided naming it. The tire became rumor. The streetlight where the shooting happened gained an unofficial superstition. Drivers sped slightly through that intersection as if unwilling to linger. A collective ritual of avoidance formed. Denial as civic behavior. Kirsten's days blurred between parenting and advocacy. She turned grief into structure, petitions for better surveillance funding, talks on victim support, interviews about rebuilding safety. But in private, the reconstruction was harder. There were shoes still by the door, a charger left plugged beside a bed that would never be slept in again. Objects are the most loyal witnesses. They wait for an owner who doesn't return. The child who sat in the back seat now played with blocks in another city, far from reporters, far from questions. Her vocabulary was expanding. Someday she'd ask about that night. Every adult around her rehearsed answers that could never fully explain the arithmetic of loss, how one person's decision erased another's existence. The prosecutors moved forward methodically, every motion filed, every document stamped, every chain of custody verified. Forensic animation recreated the shooting, lines, angles, simulated lighting. Juries would one day see how the tire, the car, and the shooter aligned like a mechanical equation. The simulation couldn't show intent, but it could show geometry, how murder obeyed physics before it obeyed conscience. The town's news cycle evolved. Each anniversary brought recycled footage and the same headline format. 1 year later, seeking closure. But closure is not a legal term. It's an emotional fantasy invented to make endings feel final. Real endings rarely close. They dissolve. The ocean nearby remained unchanged. Same tide, same rhythm, same salt. Nature doesn't archive. Only people do. Detectives rotated off the case, one by one. Some retired, some transferred. Each left behind notes, sketches, photos, fragments of theories they no longer needed. One wrote in his final report margin, "Evil isn't loud, it's efficient." No one removed that line. It stayed there, faint pencil marks under layers of official ink. As the case aged, public attention thinned. New crimes replaced old ones. But in court calendars, the name State of Florida v. Gardner-Fernandez remained steady. A reminder that justice operates at the speed of paperwork, not heartbreak. At night, the city still hummed with lights reflected on damp asphalt. Some officers, years later, would admit they avoided driving through that intersection, not because of ghosts, but because of geometry. They said the road still looked too perfect, too symmetrical, as if waiting again for a tire. Time moves, but it doesn't always carry things away. Some events remain lodged inside it, like stones beneath the current, reshaped but never gone. The killing of Jared Bridegan became one of those stones. The court transcripts, the interviews, the tire in the road, they exist now as static artifacts, but the real story lives in smaller, quieter places. In the pause before a father opens a car door. In the ordinary trust that someone, somewhere, turned into a weapon. The neighborhood has changed. Children ride bicycles past the spot without knowing. New trees have been planted. Their roots will one day thread through the same soil that once caught a man's final steps. The asphalt has been repaved, erasing the faint stains that once drew reporters. But for those who remember, the mind still maps that intersection perfectly. Every lamppost, every shadow. Trauma has its own geography. It memorizes without consent. Years after the murder, court proceedings continue. Slower now, quieter. The state's attorney still calls it one of the most premeditated crimes in recent Florida memory. The defense still argues circumstance, and through it all, silence stretches between sentences. That silence has a kind of honesty. It tells the truth that words keep missing, that evil, when it appears, rarely looks extraordinary. It just looks, well, organized. Inside an evidence vault, the tire still rests in its sealed plastic bag. The technician who logs it each quarter says it's heavier than it looks, not from weight, but from implication. It's the simplest object in the case, yet it explains everything. Planning, patience, predictability. It represents how something ordinary, something meant for movement, can be turned into a tool for stillness. Crime often hides in usefulness. Jared's name now lives in two places, in legal filings and in memory. One is cold, procedural, stamped. The other is warm, inconsistent, fading around the edges. The law preserves facts. Memory preserves tone, the sound of his laugh, the way he said goodnight, the rhythm of his footsteps on hard wood. Those cannot be subpoenaed, only remembered. And even remembrance changes shape when carried too long. The daughter who sat in the back seat will grow into her own version of this truth. Someday she'll walk the same streets and feel that strange imbalance, the knowledge that life continued precisely where it ended for someone else. She'll read the reports, hear the voices, study the photographs, and she'll understand that innocence isn't what you lose in moments like that. It's what you inherit afterward, a responsibility to keep living in a world where such things are possible. For the investigators, the case became a mirror. Each one learned something they didn't ask to, that empathy and detachment can live in the same breath, that precision is a form of mercy, that every crime scene is both a question and a confession, depending on who's looking. Some left law enforcement entirely. One became a teacher, saying later that truth doesn't belong in courtrooms, it belongs in people's memory. In that way, the story has already left the hands of the state. It belongs now to the quiet retellings, the whispered explanations parents give when asked by a child why the road curves there, why that palm tree looks new, why people sometimes stop and stare at nothing for a while. It's not fame, it's not justice, it's endurance, the form grief takes when it refuses to vanish. The ocean keeps coming in. Each tide smooths another layer of shoreline, as if trying to erase the year altogether. But time does not clean, it just folds. The city continues, the trial crawls, the world forgets.
And yet somewhere in every life touched by that night, there's a pause, the fraction of a second, before someone opens a car door, checks a shadow, or rethinks a familiar kindness. That pause is what remains. In that sense, Jared Bridegan's story isn't about how he died, it's about how others began to live differently afterward. It's about the fragile arithmetic between good intent and bad timing, between trust and the unknown hand waiting to break it. It's about how something as small as a tire can reveal how deeply someone studied your life, the routes you take, the habits you don't notice, the faith you place in safety, and how that knowledge can become lethal in the wrong hands.
The prosecutors will one day deliver their closing arguments, and a jury will decide what the paperwork should say. But long after the verdict, long after the headlines vanish, one truth will remain unfiled: that a simple, decent act, stepping out to clear the road, was enough to summon the worst parts of human calculation. That is not irony. That is the design of cruelty. The case will end, the story won't, because crimes like this are not concluded by sentencing. They linger as caution, quiet, shapeless, persistent. Every time someone stops to help, to fix, to clear, the memory repeats itself like an echo. That is how remembrance works, not to paralyze, but to remind. That the world is built on small, ordinary kindnesses, and that each one still matters, even knowing how fragile they are. The camera fades back to that night. A car idling, headlights still burning, a tire resting exactly where it shouldn't be. And the sound, not of a gunshot now, but of wind moving through the trees, returning the world to its indifferent rhythm. The road remains empty, the light changes color, and somewhere, far away, a child begins to dream, unburdened, unaware, alive.